but we don't talk about inflation enough.
Yeah, no, you're right. We don't, and part of the reason why is, and I've been around the block a few years, inflation hasn't existed. And inflation, if we live in a, let's call it a high 2s, 3% world, which I personally believe is probably where we live for a while, given everything that's going on geopolitically and in this country. 3%, if you think about it, over a 20-year period, at 3% inflation, that will wipe out half of your portfolio in terms of buying power.
Welcome. Wow, Charlie, you're here on the inaugural episode of Dime After Dime.
I'm not stressed.
Oh, you shouldn't be at all. In fact, actually, you should be nervous because this is the first episode, and if we don't get viewers next week,
it's on me.
It's on the guest.
I got it.
But no, honestly, we're so excited to have you here and joining us on the show. It's going to be a lot of fun for the listeners and the viewers, hopefully. And I think we have the right guy to kick this off. We hear this a lot, right? We have folks in their 40s and 50s that have made their way. They feel like they're on that financial journey, and they're really progressing towards retirement. And now these questions they have for us in particular, they're more complicated, right? These are not Google answers, right? These are not AI chat answers. These are more complex questions they have. And so no better person than you, Charlie, to talk about portfolio optimization as it relates to growth and capital preservation. But before we really drill into that, I'd like to just kind of take a step back and say, just generally define for us portfolio optimization, then growth, and then, of course, capital preservation, and then let's drill in.
Okay, great. Portfolio optimization. Wow, that's a big topic. Okay, so when you think of a portfolio, think of it as a living thing. It's a living creature. It evolves and changes. It starts as a baby, and as it gets older, it changes. And we as financial advisors, and as we think about it, we need to, as we get especially into that magic 40s-ish period, and especially as you get into your early 50s, we need to start making some changes to the portfolio. To A, you want to grow it, and we'll talk more about growth, and B, you want to preserve it. And so that gets into a whole nother realm of conversation of what's the right way to do it with the right amount of risk for that individual. And no two people are alike. I remember my mother and my father would always tell me, Charlie, you learn in your 20s and your 30s, and then you earn in your 40s and 50s. So you do your education, you do all that stuff early on, and then your 40s or 50s, it's time to see a financial advisor and start thinking about how, when you retire, what's going to be there for you, and that you have the right balance and mix for your risk tolerance.
I love that anecdote because that's exactly what the show is all about, right? It's about like folks that have grinded their way through those learning years, right? And they've been spending money on their kids, their homes, and they've been doing all the right things, right? Potentially maxing out their 401k, they have 529s, HSAs, but now they're in their 40s and 50s, and they're staring down the barrel of a gun, which is retirement, and saying to themselves, have I done enough? And now that I have this potential nest egg or potential lump of money, or even if not, even if you're far away from retirement financially, right? It's that now the rubber hits the road, if you will. So let's talk a bit more about, and I get this is complicated, right? Because everyone has a different story, right? But let's talk more about the idea of capital preservation and as it relates to a portfolio, especially, again, someone in their 40s, their 50s. What do you mean by capital preservation?
Sure. So you are going to need some kind of an income stream or assets available when you retire. So as you get into your 40s and certainly into your 50s, you want to be thinking about, how do I dial down the risk some? Not all, that gets into the growth part, but some. And then as you get even older, you want to dial it down more. And that would be things like taking a few more bonds in your portfolio, thinking about inflation, maybe having some tips in your portfolio, switching from aggressive growth stocks or dialing down aggressive growth equities into maybe more dividend and value oriented. That, the old adage, When you have the, really aggressive super growth stocks, and you can throw Nvidias and Microsofts out there. When you're an expensive stock and you're trading high, it hurts a lot falling out of the fourth story. Whereas if you're a value stock or a dividend stock, you're not expensive. So, you might fall out of the first story. You won't hurt yourself as much. And that really goes to that capital preservation and obviously that mix between stocks and bonds. But as you get into your 40s and your 50s, you're going to want to start thinking about a little less aggressive on the equities, a little more, a little beefier on the bond portfolio. And now in today, many of us have the ability to invest in alternatives too.
That's an entirely different topic for another day for sure. Before we go on though, I'd like you to kind of define two things. One is asset allocation, which you've kind of addressed in general, but also time horizon and how those two things one stays the same, the horizon, but the asset allocation changes. So can you define those two terms for us?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you think about the various different rules that people know about in terms of what you take out at retirement, et cetera, et cetera. When you're in your 40s and your 50s, in terms of you want to hit me again with that first question?
Well, it's time horizon, defining that one, and then asset allocation.
Yeah, so time horizon, that actually is a really good question because that also goes into longevity. And back in the day, people wouldn't live past about 70 or 72 or 74. And that's really upended how you start to think about the time horizon for your investments. When you turn, in your 50s or maybe even early 60s, to bail out perhaps, and some people get really concerned and nervous and too conservative, but they might live for another 35 more years. So you have to plan on that. And that's where the growth part, I mean, it's one thing to have capital preservation, but you also have to have growth. It is a real balance trying to catch both, because the time horizon isn't 5 years to retirement when I'm 60 and I'm turning 65. The time horizon is really 35 years.
And that's really two parts of the time horizon equation, right? There's the day I want to retire, right, or the year I want to retire, but then it's like, what does that look like after that? Those honest conversations around even health, which is something advisors don't address often enough. It's like, okay, let's look at your family history to say, you're going to live to 100.
Right. And that's one of those things that are ignored, and one of those things that most financial advisors will bring up because that is a key part of your financial plan holistically. And you can ignore it. You can say, well, I'll take it when I get there, or you can plan for it. Even if you don't want to take long-term care insurance, even little things like then starting to have a little bucket of that goes toward healthcare. I mean, HSA accounts come into this too. If you're in your 40s and your 50s and you don't want to take long-term care insurance, then take out an HSA if it's available and stuff it.
Yeah.
Stuff it every year, tax deferred, tax free, and it'll just grow and grow and grow. And hopefully now you got a nice nest egg for that when you need it at 82 years old or 85.
So you address time horizon, which is, of course, the date you want to retire. And also when we believe, how many years you need money in retirement, right? During the go, slow go, no-go periods. We've also talked about asset allocation, the mix, that blend. But can you tell me, right? So thinking of, again, someone in their 40s or 50s, like how does that asset allocation change over time, knowing that we're getting close to retirement age? And as it relates, of course, to capital preservation.
Yeah. One thing that we need to think about too is, and you may have heard this term, but sequence of returns. And as you get closer to that retirement age, you need to have enough buffer to handle a downturn, a significant downturn, that you're not in a spot where you're withdrawing money in a downturn. That's terrible, and it can really be devastating to your portfolio. You want to really be thinking to have maybe a year or two of cash on the side. That's the preservation part, because you want to avoid that big trap of sequence of returns where 2 bad years in a withdrawing period of your life would be awful.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense, and I don't think people think that way sometimes, right? Because no one plans for a down market year, right? They always think market keeps going up.
Well, and to be honest, we've been blessed. I mean, the last 15, 16 years, barring one or two that I know of that I can think of were down years. So folks have a way to forget what it feels like when we have downturns. And because they forget, they get more aggressive and FOMO kicks in. And here we are. I mean, I was in the Journal this weekend talking about FOMO and that now people with the AI trade that is going on, now you're starting to see additional monies come in that was on the sidelines, that this could be that kind of big spike. I hope it doesn't happen like it did in 1999 because I was there for it and it was ugly and a lot of people got hurt. I hope that's not what happens here.
I remember that. I do remember that. So before we get into some more practical advice, which I think is really the meat of the show, can you tell me a bit about how do you plan for inflation, right? Because it's really, you think about, again, preservation, and you think about kind of that, just the portfolio mix as it relates to longevity, but we don't talk about inflation enough.
Yeah. No, you're right. We don't. And part of the reason why is, and I've been around the block a few years, inflation hasn't existed. It is one of those things that I was taught in my textbook back in the 1980s that, inflation is one of those, chapter number 1 or 2 of macroeconomic theory and policy. But what has inflation done since the 80s? It's gone down, 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 down to zero back in COVID, pre-COVID. And here we are now at a much higher inflation zone than we have been in a very long time. The two worst things that you can have, or the two killers, are inflation and longevity that people don't plan for. And inflation, if we live in let's call it a high 2s, 3% world, which I personally believe is probably where we live for a while, given everything that's going on geopolitically and in this country. 3%, if you think about it, over a 20-year period, at 3% inflation, that will wipe out half of your portfolio in terms of buying power.
I didn't even realize it was that much, but I suppose it makes sense. And I don't think people, consider enough that inflation is obviously, it's everywhere, right? From your consumer goods to whatever. And so when you're thinking about even medical costs, everything inflates over time. Everything goes up, not down. And not many people think through that as it relates to how do I save enough knowing that inflation. So for instance, you hear all these golden rules, the 4% rule. You hear about this is how much money you should expect to spend in retirement. You talk about, again, go, slow go, and no-go parts of retirement. But a lot of people don't realize, and they say, oh, I only need X amount of dollars per year to live. And they'll say that. They'll come in to our office and say that. And we're like, did you consider inflation? Did you consider medical impacts, those costs, right? If it's long-term care, whatever it is. And they say, oh, I didn't think about that.
Right. Those are two of the big ones. Then, of course, how long are you going to live? And, they come in and say, my father died when he was 65. It's like, well, maybe you're the one who lives to 95.
Right.
And you better prepare for that scenario, because if you're only planning for 82 and you make it to 95, you may not have money.
Right. But it's a balance for us as advisors, right? Trying to not scare people into saving too much, especially in retirement, because they still need to live, right? They've achieved the status of retirement. They've achieved not having to work every day, right? And then for them to be so gun shy, so skittish about spending money because of the longevity planning. So it's a balance of comfortability. It's saying that's what I think advisors should do more often. We should be reaching out and saying, you can spend more this month, right?
Yeah,
have fun.
I had a client a couple weeks ago come in, and he's 92. And he said, listen, I never had kids and I regret it. I was too busy working and everything else. And he got married. But he said, now I've got, more than enough money for several lifetimes. And yet now I'm too old to go and do some of the things that I wish I could do. I wish I could spoil grandkids. I wish I could do all this stuff. I wish. And in the end, maybe that's a classic case that he could have been doing other things or more charities or whatever, but he regretted it.
Yeah. So there's actually this whole issue with conditioning as it relates to those behaviors. I've even read stories on FIRE, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where these folks have, really embraced the FIRE methodology. And then as they get to the point where they can kind of not be in this FIRE state, they can't shake it. Right. They can't, because they've been so conditioned either by Reddit or an advisor, right? And now when they're like, I can't break free of it. Right. And as advisors, we need to say, yes, spend more. In the case of your client, it's like, how can we try and give some back to him?
Yeah.
Right.
This is where a financial plan comes in, and anybody who's in their 40s and 50s, and maybe even 60s should have a professional financial plan done. The software is amazing. And, it's garbage in, garbage out if you get the right inputs in terms of your assets, your liabilities, your expenses, your income, and you dial in enough of the parameters in terms of how long do you think you're going to live, what you think the inflation rate is going to be, what expected returns are you going to get in the equity market, what expected returns you're going to get in the bond market, and you load all that in, and it comes down basically to a probability of outliving your money. And if you're in that 80s to 90s or whatever, you're fine. If you're 40 or 50, you're not fine. But if that's done earlier, you're doing that in your 40s and 50s, then at least you can make some changes. You can dial up and you can dial down a few things. Maybe it helps you make some better decisions of what you spend, that kind of a thing. So a financial plan is really important.
It really is. And you almost already answered my next question, which is around practical advice. Like, let's, again, put our persona hat on, some in their 40s or 50s. They're looking at their portfolio, and I'm not asking you to give financial advice, obviously, because you don't know all the parameters, you don't know all that, but what are just a few things that these folks can do, considerations they can take, just to look again at the future? How can they kind of improve their portfolio? And I think we've touched on most of them, so I don't want to answer the question myself, but inflation, longevity, but what are those practical advice points we want to give our audience around when they look at their portfolio in their 40s and 50s to make those changes or consider making changes that might help them in the future?
A couple of the easy ones. It's the, always save more. So, I mean, if you're fortunate enough to have a job that is paying you well enough that you can take advantage of full funding of your 401k, get the company match, you absolutely should do that. Same thing if you have an HSA account. If you can swing it, you try and stuff as much as you can. You do it to the point where it kind of hurts, and that helps a lot down the road. You also may want to consider some of the practical things of, if you can, delay taking Social Security. Don't take it when it's first offered. It's only 60% or so of the benefit. You want to get 100% just by waiting a couple of more years. Things like if you get to the point where you are about to retire or you're in your 60s, maybe you want to do a Roth conversion, or you have a down year in between jobs. Convert that IRA into a Roth IRA at lower tax rates if your income's lower for a particular year or two. So these are all things that you should be thinking about as you get in, because it's a really critical part, time of your life where, the stakes are the highest and the margin for error is the lowest. Because you don't have a lot of time if you get to be 60 and you haven't done some of these things and parked away as much as you can to prepare for that time when you do retire and your income goes down.
Sure. This one's, is it too late? That's the question. Is it too late? So, I mean, like, if you're in your 40s and you haven't used a financial advisor, right? Or maybe in your 50s, right? And you think you've saved, but you probably don't have enough. Like, is it too late to start working with an advisor?
No, that's the time you really want to see an advisor, because they're going to give you the advice of what they have seen over many clients over many years of that exact same situation, of what some things you can do to improve. It's never too late. And
should they be embarrassed though?
No.
The opposite, right?
No, it's like going to the doctor. You're having a little private conversation. Nobody has to hear. And there's been folks that come in with kind of their tail between their legs. But it's never too late to make adjustments, to try and save more, to try and spend less, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big thing, right? With Gen X especially, we talk about. I mean, you could talk about social demographics all day. I could, at least, right? With the boomers, with Gen X, and of course the millennials, and how Gen X was always a sandwich generation, right? And then they became the generation that was kind of ignored because the boomers kind of had a lot of the megaphone, if you will, and now it's the millennials and now beyond, of course. And Gen X, all this time, was ignored, and they're now taking care of their parents. They're paying for their kids' college. and they've kind of been ignored by advisors for the longest time too.
Yeah, that's true. And you forgot the other things of Gen X. Well, that's the household formation time. So now house prices are up dramatically from where they were, and interest rates are higher. So the mortgage rates are higher. They're kind of catching it in every direction.
Really, they are, right? I mean, it's been, but now there's no better time than today, right? There really is for any.
Well, again, now if you're a Gen X, you are either in or about to be in your prime earning years. So this is the time when you can really make some adjustments. When you are, 28 and maybe you just got married, you don't have a lot of excess disposable income. Maybe you have a baby. That's a tough time to really save money, but you should still try and do as much as you can on the 401k, no matter what. You start having maybe more bonuses and things like that in your late 30s and 40s. That's the time you need to get more serious about it. Speak to a financial advisor. Let them help you get on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, like I think of, home buying decisions or other large or just challenging conversations that you can have with an advisor that say, I really want this home. The advisor's there to say, yeah, I want that home too, but that's not fiscally responsible right now. Or do you really need to take out a lease on this? Whatever it is, it's like, I think that we need to, as advisors, try and be there more present for all those decisions.
Right. Well, and therein is a comfort zone that a financial advisor is not a mysterious thing. Oh, I don't understand finance. I was never very good at it, that kind of thing. They are they're your friend. They're there to help you, just like a doctor would. I try and get to know my clients as well as I possibly can. I write down everything that they tell me in terms of their personal things, what's going on with their kids or grandkids or parents. It makes the bond and the trust that much greater. And therefore, they can spill anything that they want to spill to me. And I'm not going to say a word. It's between us, that they're not going to feel embarrassed or anything like that. But to me, that's also enriching for me as a financial advisor. When I really get to know them, they trust you, they know you. They ask about my kids and what's going on in my world, which to me, that's part of the reason I do it from a career standpoint.
It's awesome. I love that. So I want to wrap soon here, and really it's personal insight from you. Like, what do you find yourself, if there was like an aggregate answer of you talk to prospects, you talk to clients at the pre-retiree level, like what do you find yourself saying pretty often?
Oh, good question. I think that there's a lot of folks that want to get conservative too quickly. They want to go into that preservation of capital mode because they have only got a couple years away or whatever. And that's when I have to have that longevity conversation saying, you're not going to die probably at 72 like they did back then. Now the longevity factors are much, much higher. So you don't want to pop that gun too early. And I probably see that more than anything. Folks starting to get nervous and squirrely about retirement coming up. And so anyway, I'm just trying to say, hang in there but don't go too crazy and, dialing down the risk, because you still got a long time to live and you got a lot of years to have these assets grow.
Which is a great tip, right? It's like, how far can you quote unquote push the envelope in terms of not being too conservative, right? So if you look back over your career, if you look back at your own saving habits, what would that tip be? If you could almost go back to the future a bit and say, hey, younger Charlie, what advice would you give yourself?
So I started out as an accountant. I'm a CPA. I did 5 years of that, and by nature, I guess I'm more conservative than most. I would tell you that I probably did what I just told you. I probably got a little more conservative than I should have, and now in hindsight, watching the Mag 7 and Tech Dominated, clearly had not as much weight in there as I should because I'm a conservative person, and I can't change that. That's the way I am, but I probably dialed that down too quick, and based on my age.
Sure. I mean, that goes back to the FOMO thing a bit too, right? Like it's a balance, and that's why you need an advisor in the process of making these decisions, because there's no better person to kind of consult at a third party level and say, hey, this is what I'm really attracted to, or X, Y, if it's alts, whatever it is. It's like, okay, well, let's take a step back And again, look at longevity, that horizon, inflation impacts, and then, of course, the market as a whole, and say, okay, we can dabble in that. One of my favorite things we used to do was always kind of give someone, I don't know if this is something you do as well, but there's the fixation on capital preservation, of course, and growth. But if one of our clients was like, hey, I really want to get into X, Y, or Z, okay, let's carve out X amount of dollars and say, go have fun. If it's, I don't want to say anything, like speculative or whatever, but it's like, if you really want to try this out and see what happens, as long as you're looking at the portfolio as a whole, right? And that mix as a whole.
Yep. I call that the fun bucket.
Okay.
You have your little fun bucket over there. Let us be sure that the entire aggregation of your assets is in the right proportion. But if you want to carve out a piece that you could afford to lose, if everything turns south for that idea, you could afford to lose it. It wouldn't be devastating to your overall financial health. Then go for it. If that's what keeps you engaged in the market and wanting to talk and learn more, I'm all for it.
That's awesome. I love that. What a great conversation today. I mean, thinking about, again, all those key topics as it relates to the portfolio, right? Again, the impacts of inflation and longevity, the kind of, I loved your point about being too conservative too early, right? About trying to maximize that growth side while not scaring yourselves, right? As you enter into that, you're looking down the hallway to retirement. Those are all very helpful. And then finally, I think the other thing is we talked about, which I think is a great deal, is just the idea of risk and the idea of kind of being able to play with some money, right? But also not getting too uncomfortable with where you're at. But I think the key takeaway for me is it's never too late. Never too late.
Never too late.
And don't be embarrassed, right? Because I think a lot of times you see folks that are just, they have a trepidation because they don't want to admit that they've made mistakes. But there's no better time than the present. Like you said, like a doctor, like let's just have the conversation. It might be hard, but we can help you get there, which I think is so critical. Just building that portfolio.
Well, your financial advisors have wisdom. They've been through it. They've seen it, and they understand. And they can give you a lot of direction based on experiences that they've had, just like a doctor does. Yeah, this is going to be, it's going to be interesting over the next so many years because I think we're probably in a world where it's just a little more challenging. I think we were maybe a little spoiled having mid-teens kind of returns for, the 2010s where the rise of big tech. I think it may be a little more challenging. And that just means we got to think even harder about inflation, longevity, sequence of returns, those things.
All right, we have a fun segment on the show, Charlie. Obviously, if you haven't figured it out, there's a bit of a hint of the 80s in Dime After Dime.
Ooh, I like that.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. There's a few songs actually written back then, Time After Time, of course. We couldn't get the rights to that. We tried, but a little expensive for our portfolios. But I have a question for you. And this we want to get to the heart of the matter here. You think about the movie Back to the Future, right?
Yeah,
you think,
great movie.
Yeah, he went and bought the sport almanac and became wealthy, right? I'd like you to kind of sit back and look at your young self. And just, let's be honest. Let's say to ourselves, like, if I could talk to Charlie of young, what would I have recommended or told him to do or not do as it relates to just your financial journey, right? And again, no sport betting.
Yep.
Right.
Got it.
Nothing like that. But
Yep.
what would you give yourself advice on if you look back to the future?
I think as I look back, and I have 4 kids, and so when I was earning really good money in my 30s and 40s, really in my late 30s and 40s, I was doing everything I can to squirrel it away. I was pretty conservative, and I had that total fear of college costs. And I believe that the one greatest gift that any parent can give is education to your kids. So I would take a bonus and I would cut it up in 4, because I got 4 kids, and into the envelope it goes, into the 529. And thank God it made the day when each one of them got through school that I didn't have that bite and that burn that so many people feel, and that brutal, debt situation that students have. So that was very important to me. One thing that I didn't do and I regret is, here I am And I wasn't a financial advisor my whole career. I started this 5 years ago. I was an institutional portfolio manager for most of my career, picking stocks and managing portfolios. But I always thought I was a little smarter than the average bear because I have degrees and that kind of thing. But I went to a financial planner who was a friend in my late 30s, early 40s, and I kind of ignored some of the advice he was suggesting, more insurance, life insurance, which is cheap, things like that. I kind of ignored it because I was just too smart to take that advice. And now looking back, there's some things I wish I had done a little bit differently based on what his advice was. But it's never too late. You can always, right the ship. And in the end, it was not fatal error, but there's a couple things that I know I probably missed on that I should have paid more attention to.
I love that. I love just like humbling oneself to, when you walk in those meetings, to be like, okay, that's why I hired you, right? To give me those answers that I might not agree with, but you put the trust in them. You humble yourself. I like that a lot. That's a great answer. It really is. Thanks, Charlie.
You bet.
So many good nuggets. Charlie, you were the inaugural guest on Dime After Dime.
Fantastic.
Which means you're going to have a cult following. And because of that, where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. They can find me on the Moran webpage.
Awesome. And you're not on TikTok?
I'm not on TikTok.
All right. Maybe we'll change that.
Maybe that's I'm the last year of the baby boomers. So yeah, well,
you never know. You
never know. Old dogs can learn new tricks.
And thank you all for joining us today. This was the inaugural episode of Dime After Dime. Make sure, if you like this episode, not only to follow and subscribe, but to share it with a friend who is looking to build their portfolio dime after dime.